Ma'am, I'm afraid we have to ask you to leave first class.
Have I done something wrong?
Your mistake was thinking you belonged here.
She was told to leave. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply looked at the man who humiliated her and waited, because she already knew something he didn't. Tonight, everything he built was about to collapse. The gate agent's voice trembled just enough for the passengers closest to the podium to notice. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Those are my instructions. You'll have to leave first class immediately." The woman sitting in seat 2A looked up from the paperback resting on her lap, folded one corner to mark her page, and asked only one question. "Have I done something wrong?" A man in an immaculate navy suit answered before the gate agent could. "Your mistake was believing people like you belong in cabins reserved for passengers who actually matter." The woman met his eyes without raising her voice. "I hope your flight is as safe as you believe it will be." Minutes later, another passenger stepped onto the jet bridge carrying nothing more expensive than a weathered canvas briefcase, and every certainty inside Terminal 8 began moving quietly toward collapse. But no one in that boarding area had any idea who she really was, or how one boarding pass was about to bring the airline's most powerful executive to his knees inside the very first-class cabin he treated like a throne. 2 hours earlier, John F. Kennedy International Airport had already settled into its evening rhythm, the hour when international departures transformed from transportation into theater. Terminal 8 glowed beneath warm amber lighting reflected across polished Italian stone floors that had been buffed until they resembled still water. Crystal displays advertised vintage champagne beside limited edition luggage worth more than many families earned in a month. The scent of roasted coffee drifted from a boutique cafe where espresso machines hissed like quiet applause. Beyond the enormous windows, aircraft tails stood against a fading New York sky painted in shades of lavender and steel. The first-class lounge was less a waiting room than a declaration of status. Investment bankers finished calls worth hundreds of millions of dollars before boarding overnight flights to London. Technology executives compared acquisition numbers over glasses of 12-year-old whiskey. A retired ambassador spoke softly with a federal judge about an upcoming policy conference in Brussels. Luxury travel bloggers photographed desserts they never intended to finish. Every conversation carried the confidence of people accustomed to walking through doors that opened before they reached them. At the center of it all floated airline staff wearing practiced smiles that never quite reached tired eyes. One flight attendant nearly dropped a tray of porcelain coffee cups while avoiding a rolling suitcase. A hand caught the tray before gravity could embarrass anyone. "Easy," the woman said with a gentle smile. The attendant looked up. "Oh, thank you." "You're welcome, Mia." The attendant blinked. "You remembered my name. You helped me on a delayed flight last winter." Mia laughed in surprise. "I barely remember yesterday." "You remembered the little boy who was scared of turbulence," the woman replied. That mattered. She accepted her coffee, added nothing to it, and quietly slipped 2 folded $20 bills beneath the saucer where only the server would notice. No performance, no audience. Just habit. She wore dark slacks, clean white trainers, and a charcoal cardigan that had clearly been chosen for comfort instead of impression. No designer handbag rested beside her chair. No watch sparkled beneath the lights. The only jewelry visible was a thin silver band tucked almost unnoticed beneath her sleeve. People looked past her because nothing about her appearance demanded attention. She seemed perfectly content with that. When an elderly traveler struggled to lift his carry-on onto a luggage rack, she stood before anyone else moved. "May I?" He smiled gratefully. "I'd appreciate it." She lifted the bag without effort. "My wife packed enough sweaters for 3 countries," he joked. "They'll all be grateful if it gets cold." He laughed harder than the joke deserved. Across the lounge, several executives noticed. One leaned toward another. "Who's she traveling with?" "No idea. Probably upgraded with points." The conversation drifted away before anyone cared enough to finish it. The woman returned to her seat beside the windows overlooking the runway. Her phone vibrated once. She glanced at the screen. The message contained only 6 words. "Everything is confirmed. Proceed as planned." No emojis, No signature, no explanation. She read it once, locked the screen. Her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Then she reopened her book. Only someone watching carefully would have noticed that the quiet tension she had carried into the lounge had finally disappeared. A familiar voice interrupted her chapter. "There you are." She looked up and smiled. Daniel Mercer always smiled first with his eyes. Tall, athletic without trying to advertise it, dressed in the understated tailoring of someone raised around wealth rather than newly discovering it. He carried himself with an ease that came from never needing to prove he belonged anywhere. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I've been looking everywhere. You checked the loudest places first. I assumed you'd hide in the quietest." "I usually do," he laughed. "There you are." He took the empty chair beside her. For a few moments, they simply watched aircraft taxi beyond the glass. Comfortable silence, the kind that could only exist between two people who had stopped performing for each other long ago. "You nervous?" he asked. "A little." "So am I." She closed her book. "You don't have to do this. I know. You could still stay behind." "I won't." He nodded once. Neither explained what this actually meant, because both already knew. Daniel reached across and squeezed her hand. "My father." She smiled before he finished. "Is in a mood tonight." He sighed. "You noticed?" The entire terminal noticed. His laugh disappeared almost immediately. "I mean it. I know. He thinks this flight is more than another route announcement. It is. He has investors on board, government people, journalists. I know. He believes tonight saves the airline." She looked toward the runway. "Does he?" Daniel followed her gaze. "Our refinancing closes tomorrow." "I heard. If this partnership fails, the company loses almost everything." He looked surprised. "You've been listening." "I always listen." He hesitated before speaking again. "He still doesn't understand why I asked you to come." "I never expected him to." Daniel lowered his voice. "If he says something, he will. Don't let him hurt you." She smiled again. "Daniel." "What?" "You've known me 2 years." "I have. Has anyone ever mistaken silence for weakness around me?" He couldn't help smiling. "No." "Then don't start now." He exhaled. "I love you. I know." At the opposite end of the private lounge, another conversation carried a very different energy. Charles Mercer did not enter rooms. He occupied them. At 63, the chief executive officer of Transatlantic Airways had built both his reputation and his company through relentless certainty. Silver hair swept neatly backward, navy suit tailored in London. Shoes polished until the ceiling lights reflected from them like mirrors. His handshake had closed billion-dollar financing agreements. His temper had ended almost as many careers. People adjusted their posture when he approached. Not because they respected him equally, because they feared disappointing him. Behind him walked his wife, Vivian Mercer. Elegant, perfectly composed. The sort of woman who could make a compliment sound indistinguishable from an insult. Her cream-colored designer suit appeared effortless only because someone else had spent weeks making it so. She noticed the woman beside Daniel immediately. "Who's that?" Charles barely looked. "The problem." Vivian studied her another moment. "She dressed for economy." Charles took a sip of sparkling water. "Daniel insists she's intelligent." Vivian smiled thinly. "I'm sure she reads." One of the board members stepped closer. "The Infrastructure Investment Authority representatives are confirmed on board." Charles nodded. "And the financing?" "Dependent on tonight." "What about the international safety certification?" "The final regulatory observer is supposed to travel anonymously." Charles dismissed the thought with a wave. "If they're anonymous, they're irrelevant." The board member hesitated. "They'll submit the final report before the renewal vote." "We'll pass." The inspection determines access to several international routes. We'll pass. The contracts are worth nearly $2 billion. Charles smiled. I've never built this airline around luck. The executives around him nodded. No one mentioned that the airline's maintenance record had become increasingly controversial over the previous year. No one mentioned that anonymous inspections had become dramatically more aggressive. No one mentioned that one unfavorable report could suspend certifications across multiple international operations. Power had a way of convincing itself that consequences belonged only to other people. Charles straightened his jacket. Bring Daniel. One executive nodded. And the woman? Charles looked across the lounge toward her. She happened to be helping a cleaner gather napkins blown beneath a table after a child knocked over a display. He frowned. Bring her too. His expression hardened. If she's going to marry into my family. He began walking toward them. It's time everyone learned exactly where she belongs. Charles Mercer stopped less than 6 feet from Daniel and the woman. Conversations nearby thinned into whispers. Even inside the exclusive lounge, people understood when the chief executive wanted an audience. He preferred witnesses. So, Charles said, studying the woman as though she were an unexpected stain on expensive fabric. This is the distraction. Daniel rose. This is Evelyn. I wasn't asking your name. Evelyn closed her book carefully before standing. Good evening. Her voice carried no edge, only courtesy. Charles seemed almost disappointed by that. I've heard remarkably little about you. I imagine you've been busy. A faint laugh rippled through several executives. Charles smiled without warmth. I had someone look into your background. Daniel stiffened. You what? I had investigators verify who my son intended to marry. Evelyn neither flinched nor protested. And? Charles folded his hands behind his back. And they found almost nothing. Silence. No influential family. No public board memberships. No political connections. No significant business ownership. He leaned slightly closer. You appear to have spent your life being invisible. Vivian Mercer joined him, her perfume arriving a moment before her words. It takes confidence, she said with practiced sweetness, to wear something so wonderfully ordinary. She looked Evelyn up and down. What a brave little cardigan. A few uncomfortable chuckles escaped nearby. Daniel took one step forward. That's enough. Charles ignored him. People like you always believe kindness is a substitute for accomplishment. Evelyn met his eyes. I've never confused the two. The answer landed softly, which somehow made it heavier. Charles continued. My son was raised to protect something generations built. Daniel answered before Evelyn could. I'm protecting it. Charles nodded once. Good. By choosing her. The lounge seemed to inhale together. Charles stared at his son. You misunderstand. I don't. You have a choice. Daniel already knew what was coming. Charles spoke slowly, making sure every nearby executive heard each word. Her. He pointed toward Evelyn. Or this family. Another pause. Her. A longer one. Or the Mercer name. One final pause. Her. His voice hardened. Or every dollar you will ever inherit. No one moved. Daniel reached for Evelyn's hand. I choose her. Immediately, without hesitation, without looking back. Charles's face became strangely calm. The kind of calm people reached only after making irreversible decisions. So be it. He turned toward several senior executives. Effective tonight, Daniel Mercer no longer represents this company in any capacity. He looked back at his son. When this flight lands in London, your access cards will be disabled. Then at Evelyn. And you. His eyes narrowed. You are never to enter another transatlantic executive facility again. Evelyn nodded once. I understand. You have nothing else to say? No. Charles almost seemed offended. I've just dismantled your future. You've changed your relationship with your son. Her eyes never left his. My future remains my responsibility. For the first time, something resembling irritation flashed across Charles's face. She would not perform the humiliation he had prepared. She would not cry. She would not plead. She simply stood there, still, present, almost peaceful. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. The interruption came from Vivian. My sapphire brooch. Her hand flew to the collar of her jacket. My grandmother's sapphire. People instinctively looked toward her. It's gone. An executive immediately scanned the carpet. A flight attendant checked the nearby chairs. Another guest looked beneath a side table. Vivian's breathing became theatrical. It was here. She turned slowly, very slowly, until her eyes rested on Evelyn. There. Several heads followed her gaze. I remember adjusting it while speaking to her. The implication arrived before the accusation. Then Vivian supplied the words. Search her bag. Daniel laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. Seriously? Charles didn't hesitate. Security. 2 airport security supervisors approached. Both looked deeply uncomfortable. One cleared his throat. Sir, you heard my wife. We don't have legal grounds. I am the chief executive of the airline. The guard spoke carefully. Not the airport. Charles stepped closer. I want her searched. Around them, phones quietly appeared. Business executives lowered them near expensive jackets. Influencers pretended to text. Journalists casually activated cameras. Tiny red recording lights blinked beneath polished fingernails. Charles noticed. He didn't care. If anything, he welcomed it. He wanted everyone to see that he protected his family. One guard looked apologetically toward Evelyn. Ma'am. She already had her canvas shoulder bag in her hands. It's all right. You don't have to. I know. She offered the bag herself. I've been here before. Not this airport. Not this crowd. But this moment. People deciding what she must be before asking who she was. The guard searched carefully. Notebook, paperback novel, passport, pens, a reusable water bottle, granola bars, a neatly folded sweater. Nothing else. He looked up. Nothing. Vivian folded her arms. Check again. The second guard did, again. Nothing. Charles's jaw tightened. The coat. The first guard hesitated. Sir. The coat. Evelyn slowly removed her charcoal cardigan. The pockets were empty. The guards exchanged an awkward glance. I'm sorry, one finally said. There isn't anything here. No apology came from Charles, none from Vivian. Instead, Vivian insisted. She had time to hide it. Evelyn spoke for only the second time in several minutes. It's beside the coffee station. Every eye turned toward her. The brochure rack. You placed it there when your phone rang. Vivian frowned. I did no such thing. You laid the brooch on the wooden shelf. Evelyn's voice remained calm. Then you answered your call. One flight attendant hurried toward the coffee station. 10 seconds later, she froze. Her eyes widened. She lifted a sapphire brooch from beside a folded airport map exactly where Evelyn had described. The silence that followed felt enormous. Nobody apologized. Nobody even looked embarrassed. Instead, Charles merely said, "This boarding process is over," as though humiliation required no accounting if it failed. Daniel stared at his father. I don't recognize you anymore. Charles answered coldly, You'll survive. On the loudspeaker announced boarding for Flight 117 to London. Passengers began moving toward the private jet bridge. No one spoke loudly now. The videos had already begun uploading. The internet simply didn't know it yet. Evelyn quietly collected her book. Mia, the flight attendant she'd helped earlier, approached with visibly damp eyes. I'm so sorry. You've done nothing wrong. I should have said something. You still can. Mia nodded. I will. Boarding had nearly finished when a sound echoed through the terminal. Not dramatic. Simply, a car door closing outside, then measured footsteps. A security officer touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. His expression changed instantly. He listened without interrupting, then looked toward the aircraft, toward Charles. "Sir." Charles didn't even turn around. "What?" "Someone has just arrived." "So?" "They're requesting immediate boarding. They're late. They have authorization." Charles waved dismissively. "Put them in economy. They're listed for first class." "I don't care." His patience finally snapped. "Throw them out with her if they become a problem." Cold evening air drifted into the jet bridge as the outer doors opened. Several nearby passengers instinctively glanced over. Candles inside the premium lounge flickered from the breeze. An older woman entered alone. Gray overcoat, practical walking shoes, canvas briefcase showing years of honest use. No jewelry, no designer luggage, no assistants, no security detail, nothing remotely suggesting importance. She looked like someone returning from visiting grandchildren. Charles barely spared her a glance. Another delay. Another nobody. Vivian sighed dramatically. "We're collecting strays tonight." The woman continued walking toward the boarding gate. A junior executive stepped sideways, blocking her path. "Boarding is almost complete." She smiled politely. "I know. You'll have to wait. My seat is on this flight." He pointed toward the regular boarding lane. "That line." Without waiting for an answer, he casually pushed her briefcase aside with his polished shoe. It slid several feet across the floor. A collective gasp escaped nearby passengers. Phones were still recording. The older woman looked down at the briefcase, then back at him. She smiled, small, almost grateful. "Thank you." The executive frowned. "For what?" "That's very helpful." She retrieved the briefcase herself. No anger, no complaint, just observation. Inside the aircraft doorway, Captain Michael Anders happened to glance up from the passenger manifest. His eyes landed on the older woman's face. Everything about him changed. Color drained from his face. He removed his reading glasses, looked again. His lips parted. "No." He took 2 hurried steps forward. "Doctor?" The word caught in his throat. Then louder. "Dr. Eleanor Brooks?" The name hit the cabin like dropped crystal. A senior maintenance director standing nearby physically stepped backward. One investor whispered, "It can't be." Captain Anders straightened instinctively. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice shook. "That's the chair of the International Aviation Safety Certification Authority." Every conversation died. Someone quietly whispered the number everyone in aviation knew. The $2.1 billion International Certification Review. Charles slowly turned. For the first time that evening, his confidence faltered. The older woman looked past him, directly at Evelyn. A warm smile crossed her face. One word. "Colleague." Evelyn smiled back. "Good evening, Eleanor." No one spoke. No one breathed. Charles stared from one woman to the other as understanding began assembling itself piece by impossible piece. And somewhere inside the aircraft, a phone began to ring. The ringing phone stopped almost as quickly as it had begun. No one answered it. No one moved. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on Dr. Eleanor Brooks. Charles Mercer searched his memory for another explanation. A retired consultant, a professor, a lobbyist. Anything except the truth already spreading across the faces around him. Captain Michael Anders found his voice first. "Dr. Brooks chairs the International Aviation Safety Certification Authority." His words fell into the cabin one at a time. The renewal review. The international compliance audit. The authority responsible for certifying every long-haul aircraft operating under Transatlantic's current licenses. An investor sitting in 3C slowly lowered the champagne flute in his hand. Another executive whispered, almost to himself, "The review is worth more than $2 billion over the next 5 years. Charles finally managed a smile, a practiced one. Surely there had been some misunderstanding. "Dr. Brooks," he began, extending his hand. "If we'd known you were joining us tonight." She looked at his outstretched hand. She did not take it. Instead, she looked toward Evelyn. "You all right?" "I'm fine. You handled yourself well. I had good teachers." A faint smile crossed Eleanor's face. Then she turned back to Charles. "I've been watching since I entered the terminal." Charles blinked. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "I watched your wife accuse an innocent passenger. I watched security pressured into an unlawful search. I watched your son threatened for choosing someone you considered beneath your family." She paused. "I also watched an employee kick my briefcase across the floor. The young executive who had done it felt every eye in the cabin shift toward him. He suddenly found the carpet fascinating." Charles forced a laugh. Emotions ran high. "They did. We're all human." "Exactly." Her answer landed without anger, which somehow made it impossible to escape. Charles tried again. "If there's anything we can do to correct tonight's misunderstanding, there is." Hope flickered across his face, then disappeared. Eleanor removed a phone from her coat pocket. She tapped one contact. The call connected immediately. "It's me." A pause. "Transatlantic Airways." Another pause. "The International Certification Renewal." Silence filled the cabin. "Freeze it tonight." She listened. "Begin termination review in the morning." Another brief pause. "Yes. I'm sure." She ended the call. Nothing else. No speech. No threat. Only certainty. Charles felt the floor beneath his polished shoes become strangely unfamiliar. He had once told a maintenance supervisor that the first-class cabin represented the soul of the airline. The passenger who pays the most deserves perfection. Now he stood in that same cabin, surrounded by executives, investors, journalists, and passengers whose phones had never stopped recording. The place that had always affirmed his authority now reflected it back as something brittle. Vivian hurried toward Evelyn, her smile appearing with astonishing speed. "My dear, perhaps we all started on the wrong foot." "Stop." The word came from Eleanor. Quiet, nothing more. Vivian stopped immediately. Charles looked at Eleanor with the desperation of a man watching years disappear in minutes. "We can resolve this privately." "No. Surely reasonable people can—" "For 2 years," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Evelyn gave your family every opportunity to show ordinary kindness." Charles glanced toward Evelyn. She offered no satisfaction, no triumph, only sadness. Eleanor continued. "Tonight, when you believed she had no influence, no title, and no power, you showed her exactly who you are." Her eyes swept across the silent cabin. "And now everyone else knows too." Daniel stepped beside Evelyn. Without asking, he reached for her hand. She accepted it. The three of them walked toward the aircraft door together, past the same entrance Charles had expected Evelyn to leave through in disgrace. No one tried to stop them. Passengers moved aside instinctively, not because of titles, because dignity has a gravity of its own. Charles remained alone in the center of the first-class cabin he had treated like a kingdom. Hundreds of millions of dollars surrounded him. Dozens of people stood within arm's reach. He had never looked more isolated. The fall had only just begun. The first video appeared online before Flight 117 even pushed back from the gate. By midnight, there were thousands. By sunrise, millions. One headline outran all the others. Airline CEO orders passenger search, humiliates aviation regulator without knowing her colleague is leading safety review. Financial markets opened at 9:30 a.m. By 9:47, Transatlantic Airways had lost 18% of its market value. Analysts cited reputational risk. Institutional investors cited governance failures. Travel agencies paused corporate bookings. Insurance partners requested emergency meetings. Government transportation officials announced independent inquiries. Charles's phone rang continuously. Every conversation ended worse than the one before. The board assembled that afternoon. The conference room overlooked Manhattan. Normally, Charles sat at the head of the table. This time, his chair remained empty until someone quietly asked him to take another seat. Margaret Sloan, the independent director who had spent 3 years warning the board about executive culture, opened a thin folder. I warned this board repeatedly that arrogance eventually becomes operational risk. No one argued. The vote took less than 4 minutes. Charles Mercer was removed as chief executive officer effective immediately. Only one director voted against the motion. Even that vote felt reluctant. The legal consequences arrived just as quickly. The airport security supervisors were formally cleared after investigators concluded they had repeatedly objected before acting under executive pressure. The airline itself settled claims arising from the unlawful search and false detention. The executive who kicked Eleanor Brooks's briefcase was dismissed for misconduct. Vivian Mercer faced civil claims connected to the knowingly false accusation. Settlement amounts remained confidential. One condition was public: the written apologies. They entered the court record where anyone could read them. The internet found an old interview from years earlier. Charles sat confidently beneath studio lights, saying, "I built this company on respect. That's the only way leadership lasts." Someone placed that clip beside the footage from Terminal 8. The contrast required no commentary. Reporters waited outside Evelyn's apartment for nearly a week. She declined every interview. She posted nothing online. She accepted no television appearances. When journalists knocked one rainy morning, she opened the door carrying a tray with coffee. "You've been standing outside since dawn." They smiled awkwardly. She handed out warm paper cups. "I appreciate your work." She looked toward the building entrance. "But I'd appreciate some quiet too." Most of them left. The story no longer belonged to outrage. It belonged to character. Weeks later, strangers occasionally recognized her in grocery stores. They never interrupted. They simply nodded. She nodded back. That was enough. Eleanor Brooks made exactly one public statement. "I don't do business with people who measure others by the labels on their clothes." She paused. "That's not punishment. It's good judgment." By dinner, those words had circled the world. 6 months later, very little about Evelyn had changed. She still carried the same canvas bag, still preferred paperbacks to tablets, still remembered flight attendants by name, still thanked cleaners before executives. The influence had always existed. She had simply never needed anyone to notice it. Daniel changed far more. He joined the International Aviation Safety Certification Authority as a project analyst, not because of who he knew, because he insisted on beginning where everyone else began. He earned every promotion, every late night, every difficult assignment. The fear that had once shaped his relationship with his father disappeared the evening he chose integrity over inheritance. Eleanor Brooks never celebrated Charles's downfall. She had never wanted one. She had walked into Terminal 8 dressed like an ordinary traveler because she believed the best way to understand an organization was to see how it treated people it assumed could offer nothing in return. The lesson had revealed itself before boarding even began. Charles Mercer moved into a much smaller house outside the city. Recognition came less often now. When it did, it carried sympathy instead of admiration. Sometimes he began writing an apology. Every version stopped halfway down the page. The loss of wealth hurt. The loss of reputation hurt more. But what haunted him most was something impossible to recover. A quiet woman had offered his family nothing but patience. He had mistaken it for weakness. He had been right about one thing. Someone in that room didn't belong. It just wasn't Evelyn. It was him. Here is the thing I keep coming back to. The story you just heard is made up. Evelyn, Daniel, Charles, Dr. Eleanor Brooks, and the events at JFK Airport are fictional. But the feeling at the center of it absolutely is. Being judged before you speak. Being searched because someone decides you don't belong. Being treated as less important because your clothes, your job, or your appearance don't match someone else's idea of success. That part isn't fiction. It happens every day in real workplaces, airports, schools, hospitals, restaurants, and offices. Most of the time, there isn't a powerful official walking through the next door. There isn't a contract waiting to be canceled. There isn't a perfect ending. Most people simply carry the experience with them and keep going. So the real test was never Charles's. It was everyone else's. The people who laughed. The people who looked away. The people who recorded everything but said nothing. Because that's the part we actually get to choose. Not someone else's title. Not someone else's bank account. Only how we treat the next person standing in front of us. Now I want to hear from you. If you had been standing in that room before anyone knew who Evelyn was, would you have spoken up, or would you have stayed quiet and watched? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story moved you, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones turn out to hold all the cards. Because the lesson Evelyn lived is one worth remembering. Never measure a person by what they are wearing. The most powerful soul in the room is almost never the loudest one. Sometimes it is the quiet woman in plain clothes who knows everyone's name and never once needed you to know hers.